Continuing this study in Lenten season, these 40 days, really spending some time in Matthew chapter 5, versus the Beatitudes, the front end of that. Kind of moving through that, not every single verse, but touching on some big ones in these next Sundays. And I titled this one, Our Purpose in Being. Being. Just your presence. And I'm going to unpackage that a little as we get through this. But if you have your Bibles, open them up to Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. Matthew 5, 13 through 16. And it says, Jesus is speaking to this crowd. He says, "You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again?" And I know some of you are very salty, so. It would be, he says, that type of salt that's lost its flavor will be thrown out, trampled underfoot as worthless, just on the paths. Then he goes on to say, "You are the light of the world. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father." Let's pray. Lord, as we dig into this passage that you have laid out before us, Lord, may you speak to us, or potent, or be reminded of something that we once knew but have left in the past, Lord. So we're just praying for you to speak to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're actually going to, as an introduction, go back. We didn't do this in the last 2 weeks, but we're going to talk about just verse 1 first, about this passage. And we're going to talk a little about the audience that is assembled around Jesus. So we know in verse 1 that there was a crowd that had begun to gather around Jesus one day. This was not an unusual thing. As was usual, there was a great spectrum of people. Okay? And what I mean by that is the reason that they're there is covering a lot of ground. A lot of different reasons for people to be there. Maybe they're just interested. They had been hearing snippets and they were like, I want to hear directly from Jesus, and so they were there. Maybe there was an illness. He was a healer, and so if I can just get close to him or bring my friend or family member close to him, maybe there'll be a miracle today. So maybe there's an illness. Maybe there was some doubt. Maybe there's some people that as they watched the religious leaders of that day in Rome, and they were just under a lot of doubt. Is this really the way it's supposed to look and the way it's supposed to be? I thought we were God's chosen people, and we don't feel very chosen right now. Maybe there's some brokenness. Maybe there's some families that were just a mess. Maybe there were some people that were just a mess themselves, inside themselves, and everything that came out was broken too, you know. Maybe they were socially. Their friends were going, and they're like, well, okay, yeah, I've got nothing else to go on, you know. Maybe there's just some boredom. There was nothing on that night, you know, on TV, so might as well go. There's just a wide reason of the reasons for people to be there. And this moment's a little different, and I like what Jesus does. I don't know that we think about it too much, but Jesus sees the crowd. Of course, when Jesus sees the crowd, he sees every individual and he sees every heart. He knows the reasons that they're there. But this is meant to be a teaching moment. That's what this whole day is about. I've got something I want you to hear that's going to reset your understanding of who God is and who you are in God and what your purpose is. And I know many of you are here for other reasons. And so what does Jesus do? He turns and he starts to walk up the mountain. Okay? Listen, if he was there for everybody in that moment and it was about healing people and stuff, he would have stayed right there in the crowd. But this one, he turns and he begins to walk up the mountain. He finds a kind of a shelf rock and he sits down on it and he waits. Because he knows this. The people who are ready to listen, they're going to make that journey up. The rest that are there for other reasons probably won't. So what is Jesus doing? He's kind of filtering the crowd because he has a purpose. And I thought about that a lot this week, about what happened there. And I want you to think about this statement. People with weak intentions don't make strong efforts. This is true in life. If you aren't really serious about something, you're not going to go to the point of sacrifice for it, right? So people with weak intentions don't really make very strong efforts. Jesus knows this. And so he's going to create a situation that you've got to work just a little harder to come listen. Because when that group is assembled, he knows they're there for the right reason. Something happened in the last 2 years that has been somewhat remarkable to me. There's been a lot of shuffling throughout church in general. There were a lot of people during the pandemic that we couldn't have church for a little while or didn't have church for a little while. Some churches did that a lot longer than others, and people stayed home. And fortunately, we had some tools. We could live stream and do some of that. There were some that, when it came time to come back together, they had lost their motivation. They had lost their place. They had lost their routine, and they didn't all come back to church. And then inside of that, there were those who hadn't been in church for a long time that said, I really want to go to church. And they began to come. Now, before the pandemic, it was common that on a Sunday morning or any time that you got together as a church, there were people who were there for a great spectrum of reasons. And not all of them were there necessarily that I'm here to hear from God and I'm here to serve one another. I'm here to worship. Sadly, a lot of us may have been here for other reasons. Other reasons, like mentioned, maybe they're just hurting. This is a good place to be. You know, or maybe they've got questions and some doubts, and you're in a good place. Maybe you're just here socially. Listen, I'll take it, because I believe if you get in the room with Jesus for a while, he is that compelling. I think he can change your life. But there are others that may have been in church, and I don't think we dealt with this a whole lot, but I know other churches dealt with people who were there for not so great reasons. It was their own little fame. It was their own little spotlight time. It was their power moves, you know, and it was their agendas. And when they lost that, they kind of fell off. And I'll tell you something now, I'm hearing from pastors a lot right now. We may not have as full a room as we did prior to the pandemic, but I have much better confidence in the people who are here, that they want to be here and they're here for the right reason. That's a very interesting revival that God moved inside of a pandemic that I don't know all of us were catching and noticing. But Jesus has done something very similar. He's kind of set up a filter and said, listen, if you really want to hear, then you're going to have to walk a little with me up a mountain. And I don't know if you've thought about that a little. That in that he elevated their station and he calls them disciples. You aren't just a crowd anymore. You're students. You're ready to absorb and to grow and to learn and to become. And he labels them disciples in that moment. All of them who came up and sat down around him. That is one of the highest words of praise Jesus could bestow. Is that I recognize you're here and you have the right heart, the right attitude, the right mind, and you are disciples. Because Jesus knows he's going to change the world through disciples of his. He's going to build his church on the disciples. And so, we asked this question right off the bat this morning. You know, why am I here today? This is something for you as we get into this message to wrestle with. I think this is an important question anytime we come into the presence of God. Why am I here today? Is it for me? Or am I here for God? I'm here to celebrate what God's been doing. I'm here to connect with God because I recognize I am desperate in my need for him. Even God has called me to serve, and I am connected, and that's when I begin to understand my calling, and my giftings. So why are you here today? And if you can say, I'm here because Jesus said, walk with me a little, and I was one of the ones who decided to walk with him up the mountain, then you're in the right place, and I believe your heart is ready to hear. All this has happened prior to this entire message, this entire Sermon on the Mount. And so he's got them right there. Now, and they still represent a myriad of motivations for being there, but they're ready to learn and to grow. So Jesus begins this teaching moment, of course, with the Beatitudes. We've gone through a few of that last 2 weeks. And last week we talked about being peacemakers. And again, I want to say, Jesus knows the hearts of those gathered. He knows their hurts, their frustrations, their discouragements, their battles, their fears, all their doubts, their confusions, their questions. Essentially, especially these people seated around him, they're feeling used and abused in life. Their own religious leaders, their own Jewish leaders don't care one thing about them. They just use them. Even the sacrificial system has now become kind of a payment system to be in good graces with the temple. It has become the marketplace. That's why Jesus flipped the tables on them. He said, this isn't right in this place. So they're feeling used and battered. And then you have this Roman presence over them that they're bullies. They will kind of walk down the street and you're supposed to get out of their way all the time. And they'll take whatever they want. And they're recognizing, even in my home, even in my hometown, we don't feel like this is home anymore. I feel like an outsider somehow, and I've lost everything. So these are people gathered who feel used and abused in life. And if that doesn't make it relevant for all of us, I don't know what is. Because I think all of us sense that when it comes to the worldly system that we live in. This is why Jesus says, you're in the world. I recognize you're in the world, but because of your faith in me, and because you're following after me, and because of this grace that I have issued you, you are no longer of the world. I've plucked you from it. Spiritually. And they have no power over your joy, your peace, your love anymore. They have no control over that. So he knows who he's got right there. And Jesus gifts them something in this message, especially the Beatitudes. He gifts them something. He gives them something of value. Self-worth. That's what he gives them in the kingdom of God. They are blessed by God himself and loved devotedly. That's the message of the Beatitudes. All wrapped up and put a little bow on it is you are blessed. Even though these horrible things are happening in your life, that's not what brings your blessedness. And inside of all of that moment, all those hard times, God himself loves you with a great devotion. That's the recap. Now Jesus is going to ask a new question. Not just why are you here today, but he's going to ask this question. Why are you in the world today? Now, if I were to go out and start asking this question, what people are going to respond to me with are their careers, their occupations, their hobbies, or things that they're really invested in. But Jesus isn't asking your title or your position. He's not even asking about your calendar agenda of all the things that you've got on, and you can look at it and say, look how busy I am, therefore I'm important. He's not even asking for the calendar. He's going to ask in this passage, who are you in the world today? Just as you, without doing anything, just being you. Who are you in the world today? So this is not about your doing, this is about your being. Okay? So beyond your gifts and beyond your passions and beyond your job or anything like that, I'm saying that without all of that, just as you sit there in front of me right now, who are you? Why do you exist? Beyond your contributions. In fact, I would say even inside of all your contributions. Who are you? And Jesus looks at this crowd who is sitting up. They're sitting up a little straighter. They're leaning forward a little expectantly because he has just told them how blessed they are. And they're like, you know what? I haven't felt blessed before, and I haven't felt like anybody valued me. And Jesus, this great teacher, is telling me that I am worth something great to God himself. And that God notices me. He knows me. He's interested in my life. And he's with me. And that's great news. And so they're feeling like there's something. And that's something that Jesus does a lot. Is he reaches down and he elevates the humbled while bringing down the pride. Right? And he puts us all in the same equal field. He says we're all sinners. Saved by grace. That's what we are. So we have purpose. Each of us. That's the big message. We have purpose, each of us. We are, and let me really pull this apart here. We are strategically and divinely placed here on earth with a purpose in our being. Just in our being that transcends and gives potency to everything else we do. Let you guys catch up with that one. And so this statement is what Jesus is going to kind of illuminate through this passage. Is that everyone sitting in front of him has a purpose in just being there. Not what they do. You will do things. But it needs to happen out of who you are. Do you see how we get that backwards sometimes? We tend to do things hoping that it defines us. It creates us. So I go do things, and I try to do things, and I try, and I try, and I try. And I feel so empty, and it feels such a vain pursuit. And Jesus is saying, listen, it's got to come out of who you are. Everything you do. And so if there's something missing there, let's replace it first. Let's bring back that thing that's missing, that divineness, that breath of God into your life that you've been trying to work without for so long. Let's clean house a little. Let's get rid of all the junk in there. And as Jesus comes in and makes his abode, as the Bible says, in your heart, in your life, that he makes that his home. And it begins to fill you. And now it's pushing out the thoughts that shouldn't be there. It's pushing out the activities and the things that you used to do that were the old person. It has no more meaning. You don't need that anymore. You've got everything you need in Jesus in your heart. And is it possible that he can actually be everything that you need? Because the Bible says, yes. He is your fulfillment. He is your completion. And once he's in there, God says, now wherever you go, I'm there too. And you're going to make a difference. So let's get into the meat of this. He begins this passage. You are the salt of the earth. And salt is a powerful metaphor. Salt has been an incredibly important element in the history of humanity from the beginning of time. And at the time of Jesus, and even well beyond into the 1900s, early 1900s, salt was a valuable commodity. Has been a valuable commodity and a necessity to civilization. It had that much importance. Did you know, of all the roads that led to Rome, one was the busiest. The busiest road that came across Italy was called the Via Salaria, which is the salt route. And it came from the western side of Italy. There's a kind of a Mediterranean port called Ostia. And it had salt pans, or these natural areas that salt had laid and dried out. And so they would cube these salt bricks, and they would go eastward, a little along the Tiber River, and then they would move on all the way across Italy to the east side, and be able to trade that in the Aegean Sea with Greece and all those peoples over there. It was the busiest road in Italy. It was busy just because of the salt. And so, because it's so important, Roman soldiers marched with the caravans of salt. And they were paid in salt. Okay? And so think about the Latin word for salt is salaria. It's where we get the word salary. Your salary was actually a salt payment. Okay? And so that's how important it was. And they would make coins out of salt. And they make these little ingots, rods out of salt. And they were useful for bartering and trading. They were highly prized. And this is during the time of Jesus. So salt is a big thing. It's where we get the idea. So a soldier's salary was cut if he wasn't doing his job, if he wasn't worth his salt. That's where we get that statement. We've been using it for 2,000 years because that's what it means. It was that valuable. The salt was currency. And so Jesus uses this metaphor to continue a line of thought that he has ushered into those assembled, that they had great value. And so he's just told them, you are blessed. God loves you. God knows you. And then he says, listen, you are salt. They're like, I feel like mud. I feel mostly like mud. He's like, no. You guys are salt. You guys are salt. You guys are worth so much. You are, inside of that, he's saying this. Not only are you worth much, you're important in this world to everyone else. That's a whole new thought. You are necessary in this world to all of humanity. You've been sitting there thinking you're just used and abused and forgotten. You are necessary. That's how important salt is. What a statement to make to people who thought they were nothing. That's not the way God sees you. You are everything. So let's just talk a little about salt. Salt was important for a number of reasons. One was it's a preserver. I think, Amy, you went through some of this not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago. Salt was a preserver. And I just want to tell you a couple of things while you write this down. In a world that didn't have refrigeration or freezers, keeping meat and produce good, that was done by salt. That's how they did that. And how does salt preserve? Well, mostly salt draws out moisture. So microbes and bacteria, they need moisture to grow and to proliferate, right? And so salt takes that away. Salt also breaks down wall barriers, membranes, and it makes it hard for them to, because it changes the pressures between saline and non-saline and all that kind of stuff. That's all technical. All that to say this is, because of salt, it makes it hard for the things that harm you to be there. Salt draws that out. So God places his children in the world to keep sin at bay. Even if they aren't believers. Even in your family, if you have a number of people in your family who aren't believers, I want you to know that you are important in that circle. Because your presence draws and keeps sin at bay. More than you know. As you intercede, as you pray for them, as you step in and you love them as Christ loves them. Jesus said, you are salt. Our presence is that important. Second, salt was a flavor enhancer. And as humanity moved from just a meat, a lot of proteins and salts that are built inside that, to a more of a grain diet, we were missing salt. And so salt became an additive. And then on top of it, I don't know, here's just a crazy thought, is I don't know if salt actually tastes good or we are hardwired to like this taste of salt. We're created to need it. I mean, we even have a saline element inside of us. So it's interesting that we're that attuned to salt. So we needed salt as a flavor enhancer, but as an additive. And to have salt on hand became a sign of prosperity. If you had a lot of salt, then you were a person of high stature. That was an elitist thing, to have a lot of salt on hand. If you were trying to impress people, it wasn't just the fine wine you put out and you'd make sure you showed you had good salt. Good salt. And so it had become something, in fact, it became something kind of crazy. Did you know that the taxes on salt were one of the big reasons why the French Revolution happened? Because of the taxation on salt. That happened again with the British Empire when they were taxing salt in India. This is why Mahatma Gandhi started a protest and did his peaceful walk to the salt flats so that people could get their own salt. Salt has played a huge part in the history of our world. And I've wondered recently about the fruits of the Spirit. And what's he going with here? So those characteristics are the fruits of the Spirit that are gifted to believers by the Spirit. The Spirit of God brings them. That means that those things are they're divine. So when we talk about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, or faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, all those. You guys all sing in the song. Those are divine. They don't happen naturally in a sinful world. And so the Spirit gifts them to us. It brings them to us. And they all contribute to a much more positive society. That's where I'm getting it. I'm wondering if the illusion, not illusion, but illusion of salt isn't more about the giftings of the Spirit in our life. When Jesus says you're the salt of the earth, he's saying all these things that I have implanted in you, all these things that I've gifted you with, all these great contributors or characteristics of the Christian life that are the fruit of the Spirit, enhances this world. It makes it better. Belize is an interesting country. How many of you have ever been to Belize? A few of you? It gets hammered by hurricanes about every other year. It was a United Kingdom province colony, and when they got their independence and became their own sovereign nation of Belize, they realized that when England had pulled out, England had held all of the administrative leadership positions in the country, and so all of a sudden they had a vacuum of leadership in Belize. The Nazarene Church was doing missions there. So now it's not even, technically it's not a mission field, it's actually a whole district. There's 2 districts in Belize now. And so we were there along the way. Excuse me. Here's the interesting thing that happened with Belize is they realized that they had a eroded morality system. Their ethics were just junk. They had been so long in survival mode as a people, doing whatever you needed to do to make life work, that some things they had accepted as okay weren't okay, and they knew it. And so they began to say, we need to kind of pull our country together, and we need to start teaching people an ethical system. And so the leadership said, well, what are we going to use for an ethical system? They went through and they looked at other ethical systems and laws. They looked at other religions, and they intellectually chose Christianity. Because Christianity had the hallmarks of a great civilization. If people would actually learn these characteristics of how we're supposed to love one another and serve one another and give sacrificially for one another and help one another, if we lived that way, what would our country look like? So they chose Christianity. Then they realized, we don't know what we're talking about. So Nazarene denomination came alongside the government, and they said, we need you to teach your Christian principles in our elementary schools. So for the last 15, 20 years, a lot of our missions in Belize has been going into essentially do VBS in their school systems, and they've created these tapestries that have stories, Bible stories on them, pictures that they use to teach from, and our missionaries teach their teachers what it means. That's the mission right now. It's incredible. And I say all that to say, even a secular world recognizes how beautiful and how essential these characteristics, these Christian characteristics are. You can see that. They enhance a civilization. So the fruits of the Spirit are not just for our benefit, but they're for the benefit of the world. Everybody's impacted when we're living under this new characteristics of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Who wouldn't want to live in that world where everybody's following that? Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." I think we're supposed to have a little bit of a gut check. Am I a blessing in the world I'm in? Or am I just part of the problem? Well, the last thing is salt was an antiseptic. It's not a great antiseptic. If you're wondering, if you have a cut and you throw salt on it, I will probably hear you from my house. It's not a comfortable antiseptic, but it was what they had, and it works off the same principles that it's drawing moisture that may have had the microbes and whatever in it. So it is helping, and it kills bacteria. So the term "salt in the wound" comes from this, and it hurts. It hurts. I think healing is not always a pleasant process. In the church, we're in this world to serve the hurting and the wounded. And we're supposed to be the salt. That's part of the healing. And it doesn't mean that we're here to make everybody, to be nice to everybody. But we speak truth. And truth dispels lies. It's like salt dispels everything that's not supposed to be there. So this is why we're here as salt. Then he goes on and talks about light. You are the light of the world. We're not going to spend as much time on this one because really there's so much passages. Jesus uses this alliteration a lot. But life is essential. Light is essential to life. It is so essential that it affects our physical lives, our mental lives, and even our spiritual lives. How many of you know what the winter doldrums are? I struggle during winter anyways. And then you add to it getting sick or something, and then the fake springs. I'm tired of fake spring. Just start it up and leave it there. There's that one day of sunshine, I'm outside, like a lizard on the pavement, And then, let's snow tonight. That's fun. That's fun. So I get how light literally affects my life all the time. It affects your physical life. I mean, it affects your vitamin D. It changes you if you're not in light. But spiritually, wow. Because you know what prospers in darkness. Doubts, fears, sins, rages and angers. Those things thrive in the darkness. But light, somehow everything just seems a little better. And it begins to dispel that darkness. And Jesus says, listen, you guys understand how important light is. I know how many of you are encouraged every morning that the sun rises. You understand you are that for the world. You are that for the world. You are light to them. Not your own light. You're a reflection of my light. And so Jesus says, he speaks to this when he says no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. It'd be just absolutely ridiculous, wouldn't it? Why would you do that? What's the whole point of even having the lamp? Why would you place it on the stand? Why wouldn't you place it on a stand and let it bless everybody? He's not talking about you so much as he's trying to say, God is the one who placed you. Why would he create you, who are supposed to be the light of the world, and then stick you under a bowl? No, God is setting you up as a lampstand so others can be impacted by the light in you. That's what he's trying to tell us. But it's this last verse I want to focus on as we conclude here. In the same way, Let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Be the salt of the earth and be the light of the world. In your home, in your family, at work, out, in the park, at the store, wherever you go, inside of your career, inside of the hobbies that you do, inside of all of your interactions, be the salt of the earth, be the light of the earth. Understand how important you are to everyone else around you. And I want you to look at this and just dwell on this statement. God is using your presence to bring His presence into a desperate world. So again, this isn't so much about the things that you do. You know, somebody might say, well, I don't feel like God has called me to be a pastor or a missionary or an evangelist. Some He has called to go make that a vocational thing, that this is what they do in life. But He's called all of us to be the salt and to be the light. And I want you to understand how important you are wherever you are. To be those things. You have no idea. We were talking with the men's group yesterday for breakfast about Matthew, one of the apostles that wrote this great gospel story. He was a tax collector. In chapter 9 of Matthew, he gets to kind of, in his own writing, tell about this moment where he met Jesus. Jesus comes through, sees him sitting at his tax table, comes right up to him and says, Matthew, come follow me. I'll make you a disciple. And Matthew dropped everything and went. See, Matthew wasn't labeled and identified by Jesus as a tax collector. What Jesus saw was a son of God who had won a different path than he was supposed to. What I love is what happens after Matthew decides to get up from the tax table to follow Jesus. Evidently, he invites Jesus and the rest of the disciples over to his house for dinner. Next verse. Verse 9 and 10 of chapter 9. And it says, Jesus is there, and Matthew only knows what he knows, so he invites his world. There are a bunch of other tax collectors, and the Bible says disreputable sinners. That's who invites to dinner with Jesus. Not to mock Jesus, but he's sitting there going, listen, I just found something. There's been a revelation in my life that is changing my life drastically in just a moment that I met Jesus. And all these other people need to know him too. And I'm going to invite all of them over for dinner so they can be in the same room with this Jesus who changed my life. Matthew isn't so much doing as he's being Matthew. And I want you to be the salt and the light of the world that God has called you to be. To know how important you are. Just your presence. It's the ministry of presence that is powerful. God uses. Just stand up.